Wack had conversations then. I wouldn't say we cool though. You know what I'm saying? Like I probably seen that man probably 5 times in my whole life.
Wack100 walked into a room full of Crip members, called them rats to their face, and then had to run off the podcast. But here's the crazy part. He wasn't wrong. Y'all need to hear this.
So when I stated it on no joke. I let it be known then, before it hit the what's name.
Because this situation goes way deeper than a heated podcast moment. This ain't about clout. This ain't about rap beef. This is about a city-funded, government-backed $42 million program that has been paying gang members in Los Angeles to snitch, and the fact that when Wack brought it up in a room full of respected street figures, nobody could give him a clean answer. They just made it too loud to hear him. Now here's where it gets crazy. The most respected person in that room, P. Nice, somebody who is genuinely thorough, genuinely well-respected, somebody who the community looks to. After all that chaos, after all that confrontation, after Wack got pressed from every angle, P. Nice came out and said it was all content. He was just doing it for the cameras. So let me get this straight. Wack walked in, dropped documented facts about a real snitching program with $42 million of receipts behind it, got drowned out by a room full of people talking over him, and then the main guy leading the pushback turned around and said he wasn't even serious? Family. That ain't Wack taking a L. That's Wack winning an argument that nobody was willing to actually have. But that's just the beginning. Because to understand what really went down in that room, why it got so loud, why people got so pressed, why Wack made the decision he made, we gotta go all the way back to the start. And once I lay it all out for you, I promise you're going to see this whole situation completely different. Let's get into it. All right, before we get to the chaos, we gotta build the foundation. Because if you don't understand what the GRID program is, nothing is going to make sense to you. So let me break this down clean. The GRID program, and this is real, this is documented, this is not a conspiracy theory, is a city-funded initiative operating out of Los Angeles. The premise is simple. The city partners with gang members and pays them to report criminal activity in their neighborhoods. They give these individuals police-issued phones. These phones have direct hotlines to law enforcement. The agreement, the actual signed legal agreement, requires participants to report crimes, to meet regularly with law enforcement divisions like the 77th Street Crash Division, and to essentially function as active informants embedded inside their own communities. And in exchange, they get paid, legitimately, on a government payroll. Now here's the number I need y'all to actually absorb before we move forward. Last year, the city of Los Angeles paid out $42 million through this program. $42 million. That is not a typo. That is not an exaggeration. That is the publicly reported figure for a single year of payouts to gang members in exchange for information given to law enforcement. Think about what that number means for a second. $42 million worth of snitching. That's not a couple of dudes making a few calls. That is a massive, deeply embedded, thoroughly organized network of informants operating inside gang communities across the entire city of Los Angeles. That money had to buy something. You don't write $42 million checks for fake leads and dead ends. That money produced real results for law enforcement, real arrests, real cases, real people going down, and the participants in this program, they are referred to in the official paperwork not as informants, not as cooperating witnesses. They're called community leaders. That's the language, community leaders. So if you're sitting in a courtroom right now and the prosecution's paperwork references a community leader providing information, that's the GRID program. That's what you're looking at. So when Wack100 starts going public and pointing at the Crip community specifically, saying names, saying this is happening, this is documented, this is real, P. Nice feels like he has no choice but to respond. Because P. Nice is thorough. P. Nice is well respected. P. Nice carries weight in the community. And when a respected outside voice is putting heat specifically on the Crips while other organizations' business hasn't hit the streets yet, somebody's got to step up and say something. That somebody was P. Nice. He invited Wack to come in, sit down, and address it face to face, on camera, and that gang is where everything went completely off the rails. Section 3. The Escalation. The debate before the storm. So the podcast starts, cameras rolling, and Wack does not ease into it. He is not there to have a polite discussion. He comes in with full energy, full conviction, and starts laying out his entire case from the top. Here's essentially what Wack argues, and I want to walk through this carefully because his logic is actually airtight when you follow it step by step. First, he talks about how snitching happens on the ground level in ways people don't even realize. He paints this picture. A man gets caught at 2 in the morning with a gun on him. Police got him dead to rights. They offer him a deal, 8 years or 30. What does most people take? they take the 8. And the moment they take that deal, they start producing information, names, locations, operations, and that information flows directly to law enforcement. And because the original source is never publicly exposed in the case documentation, it looks clean. The person goes about their life. Nobody in the hood knows what happened. The information just exists, moving, working, producing results. That's how it starts, Wack says. That's the foundation. The grid program is just that same pipeline, institutionalized, made formal, given a name and a budget, but then Wack goes even deeper. And this is the part that really set the room off. He introduces what I'd call the third-party rat concept. And this is crucial, fam, so stay with me. Wack's argument is that you don't have to personally pick up the phone and call the police to be implicated in snitching. If you work for somebody, roll with somebody, are affiliated with somebody who has a signed contract with law enforcement, and that person is feeding information through the grid program, then any information that flows through your interactions with them could potentially end up in a police file. You are part of the pipeline whether you intended to be or not. You are, in Wack's words, a third-party rat. And he says this directly, something like, there are a lot of dudes out here who think they're solid, who think they're thorough, who genuinely believe they have never violated the code. But if they're working under or with someone who has that contract, the information moves regardless. Guilt by association takes on a whole different meaning when the association is with a documented police informant. Now you can imagine how that landed in the room. P, nice to his credit, doesn't just sit there and take it. He fires back. And here's the counter-argument he runs, the one that a lot of LA dudes have been using publicly. The idea that taking the phone and the money but giving the police fake information isn't snitching. It's gaming the system. It's running a lick on law enforcement. You're not working for the police, you're working them. There's a difference, he says. You're over them, not under them. And look, I'll give that argument its due for a second. On the surface, it sounds slick. Taking government money and giving nothing real back does sound like a finesse, like getting one over on the system. But here's what's wild about that logic, and Wack points it out immediately. The contract doesn't say, give us fake information. The contract says, cooperate. The contract says, report. The contract says, here is a phone that is a direct line to law enforcement, and your name, your government name, is on the agreement. Whatever you do after that, however you choose to play it, your identity as a cooperating source is now documented permanently. And that documentation doesn't go away when the money stops. It doesn't disappear when the program ends. You are on paper, you are in a file, you have been officially designated as someone who agreed to inform. That's the line Wack is drawing, and nobody in the room has a clean answer for it. Section 4, the turning point, when it all explodes. This is where the podcast completely falls apart, gang, and I need you to picture the scene. Wack is midpoint. He's trying to land his argument about the contract, about Big U specifically, whose government name, Eugene Henley, appears in the paperwork, about the police-issued phones, about what it means to have signed your name to an agreement with law enforcement. He keeps saying, let me land, let me land, let me finish. He's trying to get his point across the finish line, but the room won't let him. P. Nice is cutting in. Other voices are jumping over each other. Multiple people are talking simultaneously. The audio in the footage is literally just layers of voices stacking on top of each other, and nobody can hear anybody. It's not a debate anymore. It stopped being a debate about 3 minutes ago. Now it's a room full of people pushing back on one man, and that one man trying to hold his ground. And then, and this is the moment that everything turns, someone in the room tells Wack flat out, you can't speak for the Crips. You cannot speak for the Crips. And the room echoes it. Multiple voices. You can't speak for the Crips. It becomes a unified front, a wall, and the subtext of that statement is clear as day. You're an outsider. This is not your lane. You don't have the authority to make these claims about our community publicly. Now, Wack doesn't back down verbally. He keeps going, he keeps pushing. But the energy in the room has shifted completely. It's no longer a content conversation. It's a pressure situation. The podcast format has evaporated. What's happening now is something else entirely. It's a room full of people with real reputations, real community ties, and real stakes in this narrative, closing ranks against someone who is publicly challenging that narrative. And at some point, and this is the part the internet has been going back and forth on, Wack essentially exits the situation. He doesn't get physically removed. There's no altercation. But the confrontation reaches a point where continuing isn't productive, isn't safe in terms of the energy, and Wack makes the decision to not keep pushing in that specific environment. Some people called that running. Some people called that backing down. We'll get to that analysis in a minute. But first, the twist. Section 5. The investigation, the content reveal changes everything. Now here's where people really started connecting the dots, because after the podcast, P. Nice puts out a video, and in that video, he says, essentially, it was all content. He was playing devil's advocate. He wasn't genuinely defending people signing contracts with police. He wasn't actually justifying the grid program. He was going back and forth for the platform, for the engagement, for the content. And Wack, he clocked that immediately. He went straight to his own camera and addressed it directly. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "You just heard P. Nice say it was all content." He wasn't really defending this thing, so that means nobody in that room actually has a real argument against what I was saying, because if P. Nice was performing, then there's no genuine counterposition. There's just noise. And that reveal, gang, that it was just content admission, actually does something really significant to the whole situation in hindsight. Because if P. Nice wasn't truly defending the grid program, if he was just arguing for the sake of the platform, then Wack walked into that podcast and made a factual case about a real program that funds snitching. And literally nobody in the room offered a legitimate rebuttal. They just made it too loud to hear. That is a completely different kind of outcome than Wack got pressed and ran. What actually happened is this: Wack walked into a hostile room, made his points under serious pressure, got drowned out by a coordinated wall of interruptions, made the smart decision to leave rather than escalate. And then the most respected person in the room turned around and said the whole pushback was performance. If that's an L, I genuinely don't know what a W looks like in this context. But here's the real question that the content reveal raises. If P. Nice was just doing content, who in LA is willing to genuinely defend the grid program on its merits? Who's going to sit down on camera and make the real case that signing a contract with police, accepting a police-issued phone, meeting monthly with law enforcement divisions, and formally agreeing to report criminal activity is not snitching? Because that argument needs to be made by somebody, not as content, for real. So far, nobody stepped up to make it. Section 6. The aftermath. What happened after the smoke cleared? After all the back and forth died down, the internet had a lot to say, and the reactions pretty much split down the middle in a way that tells you everything about where the culture is right now. On one side, you had people saying Wack was out of pocket, that he came in reckless, he was using the grid program conversation as a vehicle to target Big U specifically because of their personal history, and that his agenda contaminated what could have been a legitimate discussion. And look, that's a fair observation. Wack and Big U got real history, real smoke, and Wack does keep circling back to Big U's government name in the paperwork every chance he gets. So the personal angle, it's there, it's real. But on the other side, and this is where I land personally, even if Wack's motivation is partially personal, the substance of what he's saying doesn't change. The grid program is real. The $42 million is real. The contracts are real. The police-issued phones are real. The community leader paperwork is real. You cannot invalidate a true statement because you don't like the person making it. That's not logic, that's emotion. And the streets deserve better than emotional reasoning when we're talking about something this serious. P. Nice actually said something important in the middle of all the chaos that I think got buried under the noise. He said, "This is bigger than Big U." And he was right. This is a citywide issue. This is a cultural issue. There are people across dozens of sets, across multiple generations, across the entire geography of Los Angeles who have been touched by this program in some way. Some directly, some through people they're affiliated with, some without even knowing it. That's the scope of what we're really talking about. And that scope is why Wack's core argument matters even when the delivery gets messy. Section 7. The bigger picture. What this really means for the culture. All right. Let me zoom all the way out now, because this situation with Wack and P. Nice and the grid program, as dramatic and entertaining as the podcast moment was, is actually a symptom of something much deeper that the culture needs to reckon with. We are in an era where the definition of snitching is being actively renegotiated in real time. And it's not happening in the shadows, it's happening out loud, on camera, in front of millions of people. People are going on record and making the case that cooperating with law enforcement through a formal, documented, city-funded program is not snitching if you frame it the right way. If you call it working the police, if you call it community leadership, if you tell yourself you're gaming the system rather than serving it. And here's what I need y'all to really hear. Language matters. Framing matters. Because once you successfully rebrand something, once you change what it's called, You change how people feel about it. And once you change how people feel about it, you change the behavior that follows. When snitching stops being called snitching and starts being called strategy, the moral weight of it disappears. And when that moral weight disappears, the code that held communities together, the code that kept people from becoming instruments of the very system that has historically oppressed those same communities, that code collapses. Wack said it directly, and I think it deserves to be repeated clearly. Los Angeles is the new snitch capital of America. Not because LA dudes are somehow less solid than people anywhere else. Not because the individuals are weaker, but because a system was built intentionally, strategically, with $42 million of funding to formalize and normalize cooperation with law enforcement inside gang communities. And it worked. It worked so well that people are now publicly defending it. People are now arguing that it doesn't violate the code. That's not an accident. That's the system operating exactly as designed. Now, and I want to be balanced here because I don't think everything is black and white, there is a legitimate conversation to be had about what the code should mean in 2024. There are people who will argue that the code was never designed to protect violent criminals at the expense of innocent community members, that the no snitching ethos, when applied blindly, ends up shielding the people who do the most harm to the very neighborhoods they claim to represent. That's a real argument. That deserves a real conversation. But that conversation is a completely separate thing from what Wack is pointing at, because Wack isn't just talking about individual choices. He's talking about an institutional arrangement. He's talking about a city government that has deliberately created a financial incentive structure that rewards gang members for producing information for law enforcement, and has done so at such a massive scale that $42 million moved through it in 12 months. That's not individuals making hard choices in impossible situations. That is an organized, funded, institutional pipeline, and the people inside it signed their names to it. That's the line that can't be blurred no matter how creative the framing gets. You signed the contract or you didn't. Your government name is on the paperwork or it isn't. You accepted the police-issued phone or you didn't. Everything else, all the working them not for them language, all the community leader rebrand, all the it's finessing narrative, that's just noise layered on top of a documented fact. Real recognize real. And what's real is that a lot of people in LA are gonna have to decide on a personal level what they actually believe about this. Not for the camera, not for the content, for real. Because the cameras are going to stop rolling eventually. The podcast is going to end. The viral moment is going to fade. And what's going to be left is the paperwork. The contracts, the phones, the $42 million, and the question of whether the culture that built itself on a foundation of never folding to the system still has the integrity to call that what it is. Wack ran off that podcast, but the question he left in that room, it's still sitting there, unanswered. Is signing a contract with the police snitching? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments, gang, because I genuinely want to know where y'all stand on this. I'm doing a full deep dive into the GRID program. The full breakdown of how it operates, how the money flows, who's documented in the paperwork, and what it means for communities across LA. That video is coming and it's going to be thorough. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.